absolutely.
Thanks everyone for making this work at such short notice. I want to particularly recognize the work that the staff has done, not only in the last couple of days, but for the last months. They've had to be incredibly nimble and put together incredible amount of information. And I think that reflects incredibly well on them. And I don't think they can be accused of a lack of total transparency. If anything, it's too much stuff. So what are we trying to do today? I think the BAC wants to do three things, if possible. One is to catch up on the developments with the bond package since we last met in June. Two is, I think we want to get an understanding of what staff has done with the issues we raised in the last couple of meetings. And some of those are crystal clear from the memos, but nevertheless, we need to check them off, I think. And three, if at all possible, and I've no doubt that it is possible, I think we want to try to reach a consensus opinion on the district's cost estimating processes and the risk management strategies embedded in the bond. And that was the charge we were given. I think we've taken it seriously. Certainly no one wants a repeat of 2017, where the bond was ended up being short of what was needed. But I think the taxpayers would also like to know that we also don't want to be asking for more than we should be for the specified scope of work. So for the BAC members, I want you to ask your questions. This is your last opportunity. We won't be able to validate every pricing decision that the district has made, nor should we. But we do need to understand the process they've used, and we can only do that if we get into some specifics and understand the judgment calls that they've made so that we can be satisfied with the final product. It'll become clear that there are some issues that, not a huge number, but a couple of things where I would have done some things differently. That doesn't mean what staff has done is not totally legitimate, but we need to explore that. And I certainly can be convinced that there are other choices to be made where I would have gone a different direction. The real key is, can we kind of certify to the board, or at least report to the board, that the district's approach is backed by solid data and sound judgment? So that's where I think we're going today. Dan, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. That's a good lead in. I had a little bit of that, but I honestly think you did a better job. And from a staff perspective, yeah, our goal here is to be very transparent, to be clear in what our process is, be clear in what our assumptions are. We know that some of our assumptions are going to be wrong. It's the nature of the beast. We just want to be clear of what our assumptions are and show why we believe that they are rational and that they are sound assumptions. So with that, I know one of the goals, as Kevin just alluded to, of this is for the BAC to have some discussion and to work on coming to consensus as we bring this effort to a close. So what we're going to do is, as staff, we're going to do a real quick overview of the bond planning update document. I hope everyone had an opportunity to review the email that went out just yesterday. Only one of those documents was brand new. That's the bond planning update, which is about a 3-page document. So we produced that for this meeting, so we want to walk through that. There's lots of other reference documents in there. Most of those came from previous board meetings. So wanted to make sure that the BAC members had those at their disposal if you had questions about those. We'll make a note that Marina Creswell, who's on the line, she's going to help take some notes for the meeting. There's lots of discussion. We thought it might be helpful to take some notes, and we'll send those out right after so people can have that. And with that, I think we'll jump right in. With these virtual meetings, we haven't been doing introductions, but we've been doing quick roll calls. So I'll do that. I think I can check off the names here. Of course, our Kevin Spellman is here. I believe I saw Norm on as well. Looks like Beth is here. Cheryl, I saw join. Karen, I saw join. Greg and Tom, and then looks like Dick is here incognito as James, but I do believe that is Dick Steinberg there. And then so I think the only one we're missing is Tenzin, who let us know that she was not able to join today. So why don't we go ahead and get into the agenda. I'm not going to, I anticipate a good amount of discussion today, so we're not going to present the documents, but the two that we're going to focus on are the agenda and then the bond planning update. It's linked in the agenda, and also a copy of it was emailed out, so everyone was able to access that okay. So we'll start with the bond planning update. That's got two sections. It's really an overview of recent changes to the bond options over the last several weeks or month, and then some specific BAC follow-up items. So we'll go there, and I will ask our Chief Engagement Officer to check off the first item there, and then I'm personally just going to run through all the rest of them, answer questions as we go along, and then we've got some other staff on the line to help me answer questions that I don't have. So Jonathan Garcia, if you don't mind just giving an overview of the Center for Black Student Excellence.
Sure. Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Garcia. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer. I have two roles in the organization. I oversee two main functions in the organization. One is our community engagement infrastructure. How do we bring our communities, particularly our communities of color, into the fold to help us articulate and make decisions that serve our students, and again, our particular students of color, using a targeted universalist approach. The second area that I oversee is serving as the head of strategic partnerships. How do we bring business, philanthropy, external partners into the fold to support and lift up the work of Portland Public Schools towards our PPS Reimagined, which you're all familiar with and many of you participated in. That is our newly articulated vision adopted by this board, our Board of Education. And so I share that in context to provide you an update of where we are. Given the national uprising, racial uprising that is taking place not only here in Portland, but across this country, we have an incredible opportunity, and I'm very grateful for our Board of Education who's leading with race and leading with making sure that we have as an institution have an opportunity to build something that is dramatically different for our Black children in this city. Our Black children have been left behind by systemic racism, by policies, by decisions that we don't make over our history, right? As a school system, we acknowledge that when our district was founded, it was founded, as a racist system, right? That Indigenous folks and Black folks could not attend our schools. So we have an opportunity today in this year to really speak with our land, with our money, with our strategies, and with our policies to really show our Black students in particular, but every single one of our students that we care for them, that we want their education to be that their education matters. And so the Center for Black Student Excellence is coming in off of the heels of that, right? We have decades and decades upon decades of community leaders like Tony Hobson and Kali Ladd and Kai Adams, folks who have Black leaders in our community who have filled the void that many times institutions like ours have failed to provide our students. And so we have an opportunity as a school system to come together with our nonprofit partners and our community leaders to create a Center for Black Student Excellence, which is both a geographical approach to how do we serve our students in our historically Black neighborhoods and Black schools, namely Jefferson, Tubman, Boise, King. how do we make sure that in by geography and by space, we're creating the conditions for them to for our students in those schools to excel. So the idea of the Center for Black Excellence is a geographical idea to lift up those schools, right? To lift up those schools and make them citadels of amazing learning. The second piece of the Center for Student Black Excellence is how we approach our culturally specific and culturally relevant strategies. As we embark on this journey as a school system, we want to tap the wisdom, the collective wisdom of our Black elders and the energy of our young people, our young Black people, to really reimagine what public education could look like, should look like for our Black students. And so the Center for Black Excellence is an attempt to build spaces that really support the students that are in those schools and brings together strategies to really once and for all. And I truly believe if we do this with community, that we can really help eliminate the opportunity gap, especially among our Black children and our students of color. So again, the Center for Black Excellence, just to recap, is going to be a journey with community. And so I'm sure for many of you, you're going to ask questions about, so is this one building, two buildings? Is it a roof? Is it, and the short answer is we don't know. And I think that's the beauty of this process, that we get to bring and collect and build together with community, which is different from maybe the way that we've historically done it, but we have an opportunity to do that in community with our Black community. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
This is Greg, I guess. So you're right. The question comes certainly from our perspective. Where did the $60 million come from, and what does it represent?
Sure. So in one of your documents, I believe there was a breakdown of how the $60 million are being allocated. So as you know, as school districts, as a public entity, part of our work to build any building is to bring our community along. So a significant amount of these dollars are earmarked to do that community engagement, to do that master planning, to do that designing that we need to do to build those properties. So we've allocated a significant amount as well for whatever comes out of those sessions and those community engagement. So working very closly with Dan and Dan's office to elevate what needs to change in those communities physically, and then use the monies to begin to make those phased construction shifts. Dan, is there anything that you would add?
Jonathan, this is Norm with the Bac. On the similar lines, in looking at that document, which was the bonds budget summary, it talked about phase one and 42 million for hard construction. And in the document, it talked about this is based on conceptual design and overall plan. So maybe there's some clarity needed there, because I think you're right. It's, right now nobody can get their arms around it. So to say it's based on conceptual design and overall plan is probably a little premature. So I'm just thinking maybe a little different wording there, or elaborating a little more to be clearer.
Appreciate that. Dan, we'll make those shifts.
Sure, yeah, and I think a little context on this one, and we specifically wanted to talk about because the scope with the BAC, because the scope was not as a part of our last conversation. And as Jonathan alluded to, the vision and the plans for the center will change over time. They will be developed, and so the $60 million is intended to fund planning, is intended to fund design, is intended to fund capital improvements as well. But those are yet to be undefined. So from a budgetary standpoint, it's effectively an allowance to proceed forward with this vision and help define this scope of work. That amount, that $60 million, might not be enough to realize that initial vision. But we don't know that now. So we're setting aside a significant amount of funds that we can get down this pathway. There is an intention for another bond, likely in 2024. That's to be determined, but somewhere in that area that could then support additional phases of this work.
Correct. And I will just be very specific that the schools that are being looked at as part of the Center for Black Student Excellence obviously continue to be Jefferson High School, Harriet Tubman, Boise Elliott, Martin Luther King Jr. Those are the 4 schools that really sit at the center of this work.
This is Kevin. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Norm said, and I think that's what also Dan and Jonathan are saying. But I understand in the memo where you split out, you got 4 pieces of the $60 million. I understand why you've done that, and but to some degree, when the scope is so amorphous, there's a danger that the more you write, the more you either confuse people or inadvertently make promises that you don't mean to be making. So it seems from a bond risk perspective, a lot of thought needs to go into however we define this, and indeed in the bond referral language, so that the voters, and specifically this community, understands what it is you're promising them, or else there'll be a lot of very unhappy people, which we certainly don't want out of a commitment of this magnitude. So I mean, I don't have suggestions as to how to write that, but it seems like that's a significant issue.
Really appreciate that, Kevin, and we'll definitely take a look at the language to ensure that we're clear, both for the community that this would impact, and to make sure that our voters also understand the intention behind it. So I very appreciate these type of questions and remarks.
This is Dick Steinbergy, and I guess one of the things that hello, one of the things that I'm pondering is because this is so preliminary and there's so much early work that would still admittedly be needed, and seems like this is a wonderful effort, so don't get me wrong about that, but I'm wondering if there's been a close look at whether all of the efforts that are contemplated represent bond eligible expenditures.
I think this is Dan. I think the shorter answer to that is what's being anticipated now. We're comfortable that those are bond compensable with the planning, with the design, and then certainly with capital improvements. The point is very much noted, though, that as we move into a scope of work that does have visioning, that does have engagement, that does have, I'll say, some more soft costs than some of our other work does, we want to be very mindful that we're being careful that these are bond-funded activities and scopes of work. We certainly see that elsewhere where we do master planning for projects that do not include capital improvements. So we have some experience there, but this is going to be a little bit different. So it's something that we need to be careful and continually monitor throughout the course.
And this is Claire Hertz, Deputy Superintendent of Business and Operations. I actually have been apprising Jonathan of that very issue. So just know that that's something that we're very in tune with. We refer to bond counsel as needed. And certainly that's part of my responsibility in the business and operations leadership is to ensure that we're using funds appropriately. So it's high on our list, and certainly Dan is well versed, and I've recently shared those questions and how we look at what is eligible and what is not. Shared that with Jonathan as well.
Yes, and the only thing I would add to both of those, and I appreciate the question. As we are embarking on this journey, I think part of the reason that I have the fortune of being to at least be shepherding this along is I'm excited to be able to bring in philanthropy and other external resources. So as as this project is evolving, we want to make sure that we're in line with the intent and the intention here, but also really lift up the work with other resources. So I think that's part of the reason that I'm also shepherding this work.
Tom, I think you had a question or a comment.
Yeah, I was kind of echoing Kevin's comment. This is a big ask with a lot of dollars allocated without necessarily being specific about how you're going to use it. So the high schools are pretty well defined, but the rest of them are somewhat, and because the number is so big, I would agree with Kevin that you probably need to give them a little more specifics as to what this is going to accomplish, particularly with that large program contingency, which kind of gives you an opportunity to more money on a lot of other things that are somewhat undefined. So I would Kevin was saying is when you go to you'll be able to have a little clearer path as to what this represents and what it doesn't represent. That's my 2 cents.
Appreciate it.
This is Greg again. And because I knew, I apologize for this, but I'm assuming when you put the number together, though, you did think about some of your other activities and you go, okay, this is about what we spent kind of doing this, and this is what we kind of spent doing this, and this is what we spent doing that. So I'm safe in assuming then that, it has some background in how you came up with the number. Granted, it's at this point still in a very undefined state, but you looked at your previous projects. Am I correct in that assumption?
I think that is a very fair assumption, Greg. I think we did best to visualize, what could be designed based on what we know, based on what we've heard. Because again, I think what I want to be clear on, that a lot of ideas have been things that our community has generated for a long time and just haven't had the resources. So we definitely have looked at past experiences both through our bond and through our different projects and align that to some of the historical kind of notions of what could be. So, but again, we don't want to presume, that today's community, today's Black Portlanders feel that same way. So that's part of the journey that we want to be on, and frankly, it's an exciting journey that we get to navigate with our Black community during this time of national reckoning.
Kevin, it's Karen. Can I just make a comment?
Of
Can you hear
course,
me?
just jump in.
Oh, okay. I think that it will just be really important whenever the verbiage is written for the bond that goes into the voter pamphlet, that it be pretty clear what you've just stated, Jonathan, and what's in the bond planning document, that there's a vision, but yet the vision is yet to be realized, because you need to get community input, community gathering, and really define exactly what that vision is going to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we can come back to more questions. Thank you, Jonathan, for providing that overview. I'm going to move on and try to pretty quickly hit these other items, but happy to answer questions along the way. So going back to the bond planning update document, I'm going to follow along that item. The next one there is seismic changes from the previous bond option that we looked at. So at the the July 14 board meeting, there was some discussion about increasing the seismic strength of the Jefferson proposed plan, as well as the MPG building. And the decision was made at that meeting to increase the structural system of both of those to category 4 for all new construction. So very much in line with what the BAC's recommendation had been in the past. So that has been added, and that's a total of $8 million to the bond option. ADA at last week's board meeting.
Dan, can I just comment? I don't have a question about the seismic, but I'm a little surprised that I don't see Dick doing a dance there in celebration. But
okay, you want me to do a dance? Now, I do have one comment though. I think it's important to distinguish between immediate occupancy and category 4 for the structure, because category 4 for the structure is a subset, if you will, of immediate occupancy, which my understanding is you are applying that for new common areas, gyms, cafeterias, and so forth. I think it's important when you phrase this for the community or in the bond title language that you probably don't use immediate occupancy language attached with the structural improvements to everywhere else in the building. Those are a little different.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think that's fair. I think we've used language that's easy for people to remember, and also tried to be careful about when that the increase applies to the structure and applies to new construction, doesn't apply to all facets of the building. And we could probably do a better job of clarifying that, certainly in written format.
Kevin, this is Director Constam.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, I just want to say to your point about Mr. Steenberg, and thank you all to AC for your relentless advocacy on this issue. I think sometimes it may have felt like it was falling upon deaf ears, but I'm glad to be able to represent to you that it has not, and we appreciate your attention to this matter, which frankly, without your attention, we would not have really dug into and included, and I think it's the right thing to do for our kids, so thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Okay, moving along, the accessibility improvements, staff had previously provided a few different options for accessibility improvement. It's also worth noting that we are in the process of updating our ADA transition plan. That will be completed later this year and will be adopted by the board, but we're not complete with it yet. We are still in the community engagement process. But what the decision was made to increase the accessibility funding to, which was the highest option that staff had put together. And that aligns with main floor accessibility throughout the district. And so that change was made here last week and is represented in the current bond option. Capacity and enrollment is another budgetary change. The district is going through a multi-year enrollment balancing process, district-wide balancing process. It's going to take several years to go through this. There hasn't been any specific capital needs yet determined on that, but it is likely that there will be capital needs that come out of that process. So $10 million has been set aside as an allowance to support that effort or any other enrollment or capacity efforts that might come forward here in the coming years. Roosevelt Phase 5 is what we refer to as the phase of Roosevelt that would take the current configuration of Roosevelt and increase it to the same capacity as the other modernization schools of 1,700 students. We don't have a specific design on that. We don't have a specific cost estimate on that. Early on in the bond planning process, staff put together a fairly quick estimate of what that might be based on square footage and other cost data that we have from like projects, and estimated that at about $26 million The scope for this bond is just planning and design of that effort, not the full construction. So we use the same methodology we used when we estimated the planning and design for Cleveland and Wilson of about 7% of the total project cost, which is roughly $2 million. So $2 million is what is represented in the current bond option for planning and design of Roosevelt. And then the last one is the program contingency. We've had some discussions about program contingency in previous meetings. All of the options that have been developed over the last several months have included a 10% program contingency, which I think we can all agree is a pretty robust contingency. What we've looked at is some of the specific scopes, particularly the scopes that are generally non-construction, our technology and our curriculum, and have removed those from the calculation for contingency. So it's a total on the whole program about 8.5%, but the math is 10% on the entirety of the scope of work with the exclusion of those two scopes. So with that, I'll pause and see if there's any other questions on the changes of the bond options over the last several weeks.
So Dan, Dick Steinberger here. Just a question on program contingency. Does that also imply that the funds in the program contingency would only go toward the construction portion of the bond?
Great question. I think what it signals is for curriculum and technology, they're going to need to hold to their budget. And that's, I guess that's statement's probably clear as it is. That those two scopes in particular need to hold, and will, if there is a need for additional funds, they'll need to reduce scope versus look for additional funds from that program contingency. And that probably does that answer your question, Dick?
Well, and I will also remind you that there is a contingency already built into the technology components for the part that does include, wiring and closets and things like that. So, meaning, network closets. So truly the contingency is there for the technology program and the curriculum. Just like when we spend out of general fund, we budget for it and we stay within budget for curriculum. So we'll do the same on the bond program.
Okay, yes, that addresses my question. Thank you.
Dan?
Yes, Beth, hello.
Hi, could you refresh me on the rationale for excluding technology? Because it seems like demand is changing rapidly. The need for distance learning is growing and it's hard to predict in what way. So I don't understand why the contingency isn't applied there. With the changes we're going through, and we can't really rely on precedent there.
Yeah, great question. As technology clearly becomes more and more important, it's obviously also a large component of this bond program. We had conversations with our chief information officer about the estimates, and he felt he was being fairly conservative in those. And that he felt comfortable that he could live within those means for the scope that is anticipated for this bond. Also factoring into that is we anticipate being able to complete the scope of that over the next 4 to 5 years. There is an anticipation of going out for another bond in roughly 4 years. So there is, if there are changing needs over time, that would be another opportunity to go to the voters and ask for an additional technology scope of work that might not be envisioned right now. Okay, I will keep moving along. Happy to come back to questions if there are some, but I want to jump into the BAC follow-up items, which we have a handful of, and I'm going to hit these. I certainly won't read this document to you, but I'll hit on them fairly quickly. One was a question about the Jefferson High School assumed schedule, specific to escalation. We talked about escalation in the budget summary that went out here a week or two ago. Talks about the data that we used and where we landed with the escalation. Now, escalation from a percentage standpoint, escalation when it applies to projects is, of course, that rate times the number of years. So what we've provided here in the documents is the assumed schedule for Jefferson High School. We've looked at, when we were looking at all three of the high schools, Cleveland and Wilson included, when we did the escalation calculations, what we did is we sat down and said, what's a realistic schedule for all three of these? And those have changed over time. And certainly with what we have now with Jefferson going forward in its full capacity to be completed, including construction in this bond, while Cleveland and Jefferson are for planning and design, their construction will have to wait for a future bond. We saw some shifting in that. So what we provided here is what our estimate is for Jefferson as that number relates to our escalation calculation. So we provided that. So if you have any questions, let us know on that. Marina can certainly talk about the details that are in there.
Dan, I have a question. I'm not sure it's going to need too much detail in the answer, but I'm not sure. I don't really understand why it's planned to be 3.5 years before we start construction. You know, Lincoln was 2.5 years, Madison was 2 years. And I put that in the context of you know, if there's ever going to be pressure on starting a construction project in these bond programs, I think it's going to be Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, why 3.5 years? I mean, and it calls for completion in 6.5 years. I mean, that's a long time for that community who's been kind of carved out here to wait.
Yeah, I think that's a very good comment, and I'll let Marina jump in here with some specifics. But the shorter answer to that is when we were doing the conceptual master plan for Jefferson, one of the comments we heard pretty clearly was there needed to be more engagement. There needed to be more discussion about what the ultimate vision of Jefferson is. Unlike the other two schools that were going through master planning at the same time, there were some questions about what the total scope of Jefferson might be. Could it be bigger? Could it include other schools? Could it be something else? So more than the other schools, we were conservative with the schedule as it pertained to estimating the contingency. I want to be clear that we're not saying that this is what the schedule is going to be. As this goes forward, we're going to take a much more detailed look at the schedules for all the scope of work, but including Jefferson. And that's absolutely a schedule we would like to beat. We would like to get that done quicker. That said, considering the variables, considering how Jefferson could be a centerpiece for the Center for Black Student Excellence, it's possible it will take longer to get that project into design as we do more visioning, as we do for community engagement. So we were being intentionally conservative on that end, but we'll certainly take a hard look at what the actual schedule will be. Marina, did I miss anything important?
No, I would also like to mention that while we did try to front load a little bit of extra time in the master planning and schematic design, those being the phases where we anticipate really needing to hone in on the scope of the project and really have some good and useful community engagement during that process. We are also constrained by when we can start construction. So even if we try to shorten up things considerably, that doesn't necessarily allow us to start construction any sooner, because there are only certain times of the year that we can start that construction without wreaking havoc on the school year and moving kids in and out of schools. So that's part of the constraint that goes into it. The length of the construction period is really based on the conceptual master plan, and was, part of what our Annie firm advised us on in terms of how long they thought it would take for us to do the different phases for that conceptual master plan.
I'll follow up a little while we're talking about Jefferson. This is not a schedule question, but I guess I'm still a little concerned. We talked about this last time about what this is a little like the Center for Black Excellence in the sense of what are we really promising here? Are we promising that option A? And I've heard that, well, we haven't really settled on an option, particularly if we have more engagement. Or are we promising that we're going to redo Jefferson for $311 million or whatever the number is? I think it's 311 now. And we'll make the design fit that, or what are we promising? And I think it's going to be important that the language deals with that issue. Otherwise, I think we'll be back dealing with the old scope versus budget question again, and I don't think anyone wants to go there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Jefferson has more variables than most of our other schools have had. From a budgetary standpoint, the conceptual master planning effort identified a couple of different options. And so from a budgetary standpoint, we're effectively the options that were preferred through that effort were the renovation of the existing school. That's the more expensive option. That's the one that's budgeted. There's also been some discussions about, well, if we rebuilt the school and started in a new construction building, that could potentially be cheaper. And we've got some numbers on that potentially being cheaper. That option is still on the table as we go through master planning. Because we were budgeting for the higher amount, a lower amount could be on the table. Other variables that may come into play about increasing the scope, to be quite frank, we'll have to see what those are as we go through the planning process. If those are scopes of work that align very specifically with the Center for Black Excellence, well, it's possible that those two scopes of work could then share that budget. And because they would align with both of those scopes of work. But that's me probably speaking too much out of turn. We're going to need to work through that as we do the visioning. Beth, I believe you have a question or comment.
Yes, because I've worked on equity issues when I worked for the city, and I'm wondering if, let's say a year out, there's no more protests, and the people that respond to the requests for input are majority white and they don't want to spend extra money. And how will you give priority to the Black community if white people are saying, wait a minute, we're the majority, we want, we want you to focus on the Jefferson dancers, and I understand from the paper they're mostly white now, and there's the people have adapted to the rules that PPS has set up to this point for who goes there. And so I'm just wondering how you're going to give priority to the Black community in doing this, getting your input.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'll answer it by saying that I don't think that people on this call are going to totally know the answer to that question. It's going to require partnership. It's going to require being thoughtful about who we reach out to, who we solicit the input from versus just taking all comers, and working closely with Jonathan Garcia and his group and his contacts, and with our partners in the community, our partners in that neighborhood, in the Albina neighborhood, to help inform us. And that's a very high level response. There's obviously going to need to be more detail around that as we move closer to that. But it's a complex issue. There's certainly lots of different moving parts, and it's something that we and the BAC and everyone here will need to keep an eye on, that we're doing that diligently.
So Dan, this is Dick. I've got a question as I look at the Jefferson schedule and the calculation on that you must have done on escalation. So if I'm reading the schedule right, looks like the current estimate as of today would be escalated out to if it's midpoint of construction to like 2025, am I reading that right about? So it's like 5 years worth of escalation on the construction?
Yeah, Marina, do you want to talk about the point in which we escalated Jefferson? I know because it's a phase project, usually we're pretty simplistic if we say we'll go to the midpoint of construction, but because of the phasing, including the last phase of site work at Jefferson, I think you put a little more critical eye on that one. So Marina, do you know that answer offhand?
Give me just 1 second here while I pull up the exact data.
Okay. And while you're doing that, I guess I'm also curious as to what you probably pull up there is what the total dollar amount was for escalation that is part of the 311 million, and then how you handled escalation calculations for Benson, the MPG building, and all the physical facility improvements.
Okay, I can answer one of those questions, but if you want exact numbers, you're going to need to give me a minute to pull up that data as well. I'm afraid that's in a different spreadsheet, and I'll have to go find that and get back to you. But essentially for Jefferson, we looked at a midpoint of construction that was December of 2025. Our cost estimates were done in January of this year, so they are escalated from January. So that should play into that total number of years that went into it. And if you give me a minute, maybe move on to another question, I can take a minute to go find the exact dollar amount.
This is Norm. While we're on the topic of escalation, I noticed in the Dan, your 2020 bond budget summary document, when it talked about escalation, maybe just looking at that, the text doesn't align with what the chart shows as far as the information from the three cost estimators, because the actual, I agree with what you came up with, which I think is conservative with the, what was it, the 4% for the few years and 3% thereon. But, you know, the cost estimators, actually, two of them, one went down, then flat, one was flat, then down, and only one was flat, then up. So it'd be interesting, actually, that chart put in what you actually came up with, overlaying those three. And maybe I'm just looking at it wrong, but it's just something I think just to look at to make sure it's correct, because the actual text talks about the cost estimators projecting it to go up when two of them have it, you know, down or flat and down. So just take a look at that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I apologize if I may have jumbled some of the language there. Yeah, exactly what the conclusion is what we intended to draw there, Norm, is that it looks like for the next year, we're in this 3 to 5 range. And then, you know, one's going up, two are going down. And so we generally fall a step down, but not as far down as all of them. So we're trying to be right in the middle of the range, but it sounds like I might have jumbled that a little.
With all the uncertainty going forward, a conservative approach on escalation is prudent.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And to Dick, I think you asked a question, correct me if I didn't catch it, about escalating the facility improvements and to what point in time we took those. What we did for all of those, I can't think of any exceptions, is we put together, again, an assumed schedule. How long do we think this is going to take? And then went to the midpoint of construction. And an example would be, you know, our roofing work. The next year, we don't think we're going to need roofing work to be funded by the 2020 bond. That's already covered by 2017. So I think it's 4 years or whatever of work. So we put that out there on the tail end of what's currently on our books, and then escalated to the middle of that.
And Dick, you also asked about Benson and MPG. And I think because the numbers haven't changed, we're still using the last estimated escalation assumptions. So those would be pre-COVID So I assume, therefore, they're slightly conservative.
Sure, that's a good question. I'll let Marina correct me on this one too. She's more on the details of the active projects. For this bond, future bond budgeting process, we wanted to be consistent with our escalation and not use one number from somewhere and one from somewhere else. So that's why we said from a district standpoint, we're going to say what escalation is, and we're going to apply it uniformly throughout. For our active projects like Benson and NPG, I think they're getting their information more directly from the cost estimator that's working on that project and from their general contractors that are working on that project. So they certainly could be a little bit different, but we see those as more defined and more specific to those specific projects.
Right, and you know, their schedules are much shorter, so the impact of escalation is much less if
right,
we're off one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I lost my place here. Let me go back. We have a couple more topics, and then I think we'll get into some BAC discussion. And one of the topics, the administration cost estimate. So what we've been using for the bond options is a percentage rate for estimating our administration costs, which is a really quick and easy and convenient way to estimate costs when the options are changing quite a bit and scope is changing quite a bit. And so that worked out pretty well as we reviewed options. Admittedly, that's somewhat of an inelegant way to do it in an imprecise way, even when there are a bunch of variables. So since our last meeting, we have sat down, we've looked at a couple of different potential staffing and administrative management models that might support this scope of work, taking into account that some of the scope is a little bit amorphous. And in general, we see that falling in the mid $50 million range, excluding bond issuance costs. And bond issuance costs, there's some notes, and I won't get into those, but that could add to that total, as can a number of other variables. But in general, we see the cost being somewhere in $50 to $60 million range. The current budget is $62 million. We feel comfortable with what the information we have now, that is a number that will be able to manage the work as it is now. Another question or a comment that I wanted to be clear about, because we have these overlapping of bonds, and it just adds more complexity on complexity. The 2017 scope, all the projects, including Benson and MPG, the costs for those are estimated in the 2017 budget. So overhead costs, administration costs that are necessary to complete the 2017 projects are included in that estimate for that work, all the way out to basically the end of the Benson project, which is 2025, I can't remember off the top of my head. If we pass another bond, there will be sharing of costs. Marina, for example, we won't duplicate her. She will effectively manage that additional scope of work. So we were careful to not double count those costs. Where we saw we needed an increase in administration, if we needed additional accounting staff, that's what we put in our estimated staffing model for 2020. But we were trying to be careful not to double count costs that were already included in the 2017 bond. So hopefully that's clear. I know that's a little bit complex, and there's lots of moving parts there. Another area that we want to follow up on was the Benson budget and value engineering. So similar comment, I guess I'll just reiterate about the 2017 projects, of which the Benson and MPG we consider part of the 2017 projects, even though their funding will be split amongst multiple bonds. But the delta, or the amount that is in the 2020 bond for the 2017 projects, ostensibly Benson and MPG, is the delta between the budget we have for 2017 and what we are forecasting the cost to be for the totality of those projects, which is a little over $200 million. And we wanted to just point out here, I think addressing some of the questions of the Benson and MPG in total is approximately 357 estimate at completion. That's what was identified in the master plans. So that is what that total cost is. We continue to forecast that we are going to hit that $357 million number. That getting to that number includes a value engineering target that we have during the current design phase of, as of right now, is roughly $5 million. So we are looking to reduce costs on our current estimates of about $5 million to get to that 357. Also just want to note that there are a couple of contingencies that could apply to Benson or any other 2017 project is, well, not the first one. Benson, as is, has a contingency of $46 billion. 35 million of that is within the GMP, 11 of that is without. So if we don't have any more value engineering, think that that number would go from 46 down to 41. But the total estimate for 2017 also includes 28 million, approximately 28 million of additional contingency to support 2017 project. I'll stop talking there because that was a lot of numbers and a lot of talking through a bunch of cascading projects and budgets. But hopefully that provides some clarity because it is confusing when we're overlapping these projects, these bonds, and these funds.
I had a comment, I'm afraid. Yeah, you know, you've listed there the 46 million in project contingency, which is, as far as I can tell, is accurate. I'm sure it is. But what you don't say in this memo, although you've told us previously, that this is less than the district standard. This is about 13%, and at least on the spreadsheet that we went over with Brian some time ago, the district standard was 15. So I don't know what to do with that other than I assume you've made a professional judgment that the 13% is sufficient for where we are at that stage of the design. And I guess as much as anything, I'm just looking for confirmation of that. Don't
Kevin,
we understand it's less than the standard, and we think that's okay?
Dan, this is Brian. Can I offer one comment to that?
Sure.
One comment to that, Kevin, is that the 13% is aggregate of the 4 projects, right?
Right.
We do have one project in that mix that has a standard of 10%.
Right.
So it does skew, it's not straight up 15% across all projects because MPG would be at a 10% factor.
Right.
Just to note that.
I agreed, and I think several of us would argue that it's past time to split out MPG from Benson because it's confusing everybody, at least on our committee. But that's
right.
Not a discussion for today.
Yeah.
So in essence, MPG has too much contingency, and the rest of Benson has too little, according to district standards. Now, in some, it's couple of percentage points below standard, and I'm just looking for confirmation that you've looked at this and your professional judgment is that that's okay.
Yeah, this is Dan again. It's a great point, and the short version is yes. From our perspective, from staff's perspective, the project team, OSM. The contingency that is in there is adequate for Benson. The standard that we have that you allude to is new construction projects begin with a 10% contingency, and renovation projects begin with a 15% contingency. And we do our best to hold those through design so that we're as close to that as we can be when we get into construction. There's certainly have been situations, and Madison's actually another one, where when we went into construction, we were lower than where we would like to be, but based upon where we were in that project, the amount of pre-construction services, the destructive testing that we had gone in there, we felt comfortable with that number. So we had to use professional judgment. And where we are with Benson, with both the Benson's project contingency, knowing the MPG has a large, is new construction, so it's got a large new construction component. and that we do still have built into that 2017 SMAC completion a significant amount of program contingency, and knowing where we are with Madison, knowing where we are with Kellogg, knowing where we are with Lincoln, we do feel that number is sufficient to deliver all those projects per the current scope of work. Okay, I want to hit the last topic here, and then we'll go into some other discussion. And we've touched on it already, and it's program contingency. And what this language here is, it really talks about program contingency for the 2020 bond or for any bond. Really does two things. It covers non-discretionary costs, things that we don't have much control over, and discretionary costs, things that the district does have control over. From a non-discretionary standpoint, things that could impact the contingency, and I won't read them off, but the COVID, there's a lot of questions about that. Like, what is that really going to do? It's almost less a concern about what it does to the cost directly as what it does to our schedules, which then impact costs. And so there's a lot of variables out there. And authority having jurisdiction, what changes might we see from the government that could impact these projects? So those are non-discretionary that we think having a robust program contingency will support. There's also the non-discretionary where the district is choosing to change scope or to add scope. We've talked about a couple of scope of work that is in this bond that could potentially have significant changes that, if we have a program contingency, could support that. The enrollment and capacity is one. We're going through this multi-year effort to look at all the district's schools enrollment. And there's a possibility there that there's going to be a significant need, change a school, add capacity to a school. A program contingency would allow us an opportunity to support that. And the Center for Black Student Excellence as well. We've talked about how that is a vision that is going to be developed over time. We've put significant funds to it, but it could be larger than what we are anticipating right now. This program contingency would be able to go towards that. And I think the last thing I'll say is, well, a couple things. We know the need is very large. Deferred maintenance alone for the district is over $2 billion. Plus, there's lots of other scopes of work that have needs that are outside of just deferred maintenance. So if we end up not needing this much program contingency, there is lots of opportunity of where that could be spent on bond-funded scope of work, which with this multi-year plan, multi-decade plan of going out for a sequencing of bonds, having additional program contingency that could go towards a scope of work in this bond could effectively lower what the scope would be for a future bond. So I want to point that out, as that is our rationale for why we think that the contingency, even though it's a large number, is appropriate for this bond.
I have a couple of observations about the program contingency, and this comes from the concern that I wouldn't want the voters to think that we're asking for more than we need. It is a big number, $90 million. That's a big number. I appreciate that you took out of the calculation the curriculum and technology that, and we talked about that last time. I think that maybe the 10% doesn't apply to everything. Well, it seems to me that maybe it doesn't apply to Benson and MPG. I mean, the 2017 shortfall, we just got through a discussion saying Benson and MPG in 2017, or the calculation of that, has program contingency and has a sufficient project contingency. So why are we adding another 10% in the 2020 number? And it's not an insignificant number. It's $20-some million, right? I also wonder about the admin number, because you've rationalized, that sounds pejorative, I don't mean rationalized, but you've explained the how you come by the $63 million that, you know, you calculate it to be somewhere between, you know, mid 50s and maybe it'll go up to 60. So there's a little bit of contingency in that number too. So I wonder if we add the 10%, that makes the admin number not 63 million, but 70 million. So I wonder if we should think about, or what's your thinking? I guess it's more appropriate. Why do we need another 10% on Benson, MPG, and administration? Because or why do we need a full 10%? Maybe we need some, and it should be 5 on those, or 3, because those are big numbers.
Yeah, those are good, very good observations. In particular, the administration one, or I guess all of them, I shouldn't say in particular. I think a couple of, they're not just comments to that would be the program contingency, you know, of course, won't just go to specific scopes of saying, oh, there's an overage, therefore it needs to support the overage. It can go to new scopes of work. And what we have seen after the 2012 bond passed and the 2017 bond passed, significant additional new scope of work was added to both of those programs. In particular, in 2012, during design of Roosevelt and Franklin, the high school ed spec changed from roughly 220,000 square feet to 280,000 square feet. So huge additions that were discretionary. The district said that's the right thing to do, so that's what we did. Well, that had impacts downstream, of course. Those funds had to come from somewhere. We other scope of work that didn't get completed because we had to shift funds to the high school. And then similar, of course, you know, 2017, you know, where we didn't have program contingency to pull from, we still chose to make the right decision and add scope of work, such as the MPG building, which was another $60+ million. But I think what we've seen is we've used those funds, whether they've been available or not, because that is the right decisions that we have, the district have decided to make. I would also, I think why we're a little more comfortable with this, without, you know, saying it specifically, is I think what the data has shown and the feedback we're getting is that bottom line number, the 1.2, there isn't so much a sensitivity to that. Any of the options that we put forward for the bond, we are looking to maintain the existing tax rate that we have. And I think the sensitivity is more towards the tax rate and not towards the total sum. And so having a little more cushion, for lack of a better term off the top of my head, we don't think will have a negative impact to the overall, the voters, and is a smart way to guard against potential unintended consequences of unforeseen conditions or added scope that could impact the other scopes of work. And ultimately, there's this piece of, I think, from a staff perspective, which is hard to communicate. And I think, Kevin, what you're saying is this isn't easy to communicate a lot of this, right? Staff, you might inherently understand it, but communicating this is hard. Is if there is funds, if there's a significant amount of funds that aren't specifically supportive of these scopes of work, and we're getting towards the end of the bond, we can put those into things that will be a part of the next bond. We can put that into roofs and our mechanical systems. So from a zero-sum game, all of these funds will ultimately be spent on scopes of work that are bond scopes.
And I don't want to suggest otherwise. I'm sure that's the case. It concerns me that there's an argument that we're asking for more here than we need for the defined scope, and saying that, or telling the taxpayers that, well, we might add some scope. We don't know exactly what, but we might add some. I don't know how. I mean, maybe that's okay. I don't want to answer that question, but maybe the district's comfortable with that, because I think that question will come from taxpayers or the media, they'll ask, what's $93 million in contingency? What's that all about? So I understand your point about the tax rate, but if, as I understood it, you know, if we lopped off 200 million of this bond or added 200 million of this bond, we would still engineer it so the tax rate doesn't change. So, you know, the bottom line doesn't necessarily change that strategy, I think. So.
This is great, but having said that, what I've heard this afternoon is you have put together a budget based on your best information to do these scopes of work. Now, what you've just explained, Dan, is what happens if things change after the bond measure passes. But from, I guess, our perspective as the BAC, at least from mine, do we have a budget that reflects what you folks have thought you were going to do on these projects? And at least from what I can tell, it does. And all you've done is explain, well, if things change, here's where we would have to deal with it. Am I right in that thinking?
Yeah, I think I followed that. I believe that's accurate.
I'm not arguing against that concept, Greg. I'm posing the question about what's the appropriate number. And when we rationalize it by saying, what is 10% of, for instance, 10% of Benson and MPG, where we already have a contingency for those, is that the right rationalization? Maybe it should be 15% on all but Benson and MPG. I don't know, but it should be a thoughtful and consistent process. It seems like that's my comment.
Kevin, this is Cheryl.
Yes, Cheryl.
I'm going to jump in here for a minute. I've been listening to the conversation about contingency, and as a public employee who's managing a project right now that's experiencing incredible hits to the contingency, some COVID related, others due to other factors. I guess my point of view would be, I would be conservative and make sure that the contingency is one where you really believe you can get through the projects as designed, and also address some of those things that pop up, because many things have popped up in the last 8 years with this bond program. Sometimes decision makers change their mind about things. Sometimes there's surprises in the buildings or new ideas that pop up. I think it's important to be very clear with the community what the contingency is, and then what the benefit savings during the construction of the projects funded by this program could result in, and what the benefits of those things would be. I'm not suggesting that we ask for more money than we think is reasonable, but I think it's important for the integrity of the bond program to have resources to deliver on those things that are part of the commitment in the bond. Kevin, this is Director Constam. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I want to appreciate what Cheryl said, and also recognize that I think we have a pretty robust program and project contingency in this bond, and I just want to drill a little more deeply into what you said. And if the BAC believes that some of that administrative costs and program-wide contingency is more than is necessitated by the projects and is there to partly cushion against scope change, I think we should be really clear about that, because in my view, it would be responsible of the board to say, we want the right contingency that you're recommending, but we don't need to build in contingency. We don't need to build in more for scope change, because we can prevent against that. We haven't historically, Dan, you're not wrong, as you all know.
But I do think that that would be a very reasonable place for us to end up. So I'm interested in where that kind of comes down on the numbers.
Yeah, when we're all done here, I think we'll have a discussion about this, and I may be the only one who's pushing on this number. I don't know. But I think it's important we raise these questions. And Cheryl, I agree with every single word you said. I mean, the issue is simply the number. What is it? What should it be? That's the issue, I think. So we'll come back to it when we try to summarize our opinion.
Well, if we aren't, or if there aren't any more questions about that, that's the last item that was on the bond planning update. So on the agenda, the next category is BAC recommendation, and what we've thrown in there is this language from the BAC charter specific to bond planning oversight and recommendations. So I think this is the appropriate time for the BAC to have discussions about where they think the recommendation or the opinion might be.
Just before we do that, Dan, I've got just a couple of other things I want to check off, and I think these will be very brief. As I understand it, and this will kind of be a yes/no answer, and I think the answer is yes, but as I understand it, when we first met way back in 2019 even, or maybe early 2020, and we looked at the Jefferson estimates, there were questions about the unit prices we were using for FF&E and soft costs. And I think what you've told us, and this is what the confirmation I think that's important, is that you have now used data from experience from the other projects. Is that right? Maybe this is a Marina question. I see you nodding your head. So that's good. Good. The other thing that was left hanging a little bit, and I know this is not an OSM decision necessarily, I think you've been instructed along these lines, is the question of Wilson and Cleveland and the strategy to go through design, and that's what's been costed, to take those schools entirely through design, and that's a legitimate strategy, but there are risk issues associated with that decision, and I just what is if we are to do that, what is your contracting strategy going to be covered by a 2024 bond? So that's their problem, if you like. But I mean, are you intending to bid these high schools, or I mean, what's the contracting strategy, and that has an impact on the district's risk, I think.
Sure. That's a good question, and I'll preface by saying, some preliminary thoughts, that I'll say now, or certainly wouldn't overrule wiser, more thoughtful consideration down the line. But yeah, what has been budgeted for Cleveland and Wilson effectively is the amount to get up to the point of construction. I think there will need to be a decision point with these projects of based upon the timing of the bond, the timing of design, and when they would go into construction, how far down the line do we want to get if these are going CMGC? And what does the contracting look like with a CMGC, bringing them on just for pre-construction services, and then we potentially change courses mid-race, or we come up with a creative strategy that says, we're going to bring you on, it's going to be contingent upon the passage of a future bond. We can have discussions. I'm not fully thought out in that, and certainly we haven't been able to have discussions with all the smart people that are smarter than me about the best way to do that, and we're happy to take input from the BAC along the way.
Hi, this is Norm. So in the bond, there'll be the full design cost. But is it fair to say then that the pre-construction services or the CM portion are not in the bond currently?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think the way the language reads is planning and design. But what it would be, and we might need to just clarify that, it would be really any cost to get up effectively to the point of construction. So the way that we estimated is we looked at our Lincoln and Madison projects and looked at total costs, including pre-construction services, including permitting, and any other hard or soft costs from project inception up to when we broke ground. And so that's what we estimated on, assuming we're going to be incurring all of those costs up to that point.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, can I interrupt you? This is Director Moore. Can you talk a little bit about Roosevelt? So we're going to be allocating $2 million for planning and design for Roosevelt. Is that going to be sort of the functional equivalent of the master planning and design work being done for Cleveland and Wilson, so that it'll be essentially, you know, ready to shovel ready kind of?
Yeah. Yes, we took the exact same logic that we had at Wilson and applied it to Roosevelt. We even took the same estimate percentage. And so we look at the three of those from a budgetary standpoint exactly the same way.
Okay, but it doesn't appear in the timeline. So what's the thinking around that?
That is a good question. I think it's fair to say we just haven't had opportunity to take a look at that yet, what the timing would be. The documents that were sent out here were from weeks ago. We will need to take a look at that and decide what that timing is. So that's a great question. That sort of, I missed that one.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, this is Dick. So that seems to imply, tell me if I'm wrong, that the construction work for Wilson and Cleveland would happen concurrently. Is that realistic, or is that correct?
I don't know if I know the answer to that offhand. We generally.
Dan, I think Marina's nodding.
Oh, all right. Go, Marina.
The construction work, sorry, Dan. The construction work for Cleveland and Wilson would be happening concurrently, simply because when we moved from doing 3 high schools, we at that point had staggered them in a way that allowed us to kind of open 1 school per school year, so to speak. That worked out very well with the types of construction that needed to happen for those 3 schools. In moving back Cleveland and Wilson, we still want to get them done as quickly as possible, but that means that now we're going to have 2 schools that are under construction at the same time. That's not highly unusual for us. Obviously, we're doing construction on Lincoln, Madison, and Kellogg right now. So yeah, it's certainly well within our capacity to do so.
Okay, any other questions for Dan or any of his folks? Very good. Well, let's start a discussion or get some input in what our recommendation might be. And before we start, I think the board is looking for our recommendation. We have lots of time to ruminate over this. They need it on Tuesday. So we have to act pretty quickly here. And my expectation, I think, just by listening to what you all have been saying and what we've talked about before, is that I don't think we're going to have that much difficulty reaching a consensus. And so obviously we need to go through that, but then my intention would be I would draft a relatively brief memo and circulate it tomorrow morning. If we agree as a group that we don't agree on something, I think that would put a burden on us to explain that, and the memo might get a little more lengthy. But if in general we think that the bond package is supported by data and solid judgment, I don't think we need to go through too much of our thought process. We can just kind of reach a conclusion. But I'll leave. That's my thought, at least. So I'll open it up, and let's hear what you all have to say.
This is Tom. I'm going to jump in first. I guess my thoughts are, with the exception of the program contingency, I think there's some relevance into re-examining that. I think your point about whether you need that program contingency applied to Benson is a good point, particularly in light of the fact that it's such a big number. And then when you start trying to explain it, it sounds a little wishy-washy and, well, we just have a big number because we know some things are going to change. We don't know what those are. So that would be the only area I would be concerned that would be worth re-examining. I think as far as the rest of the program goes, all of these schools have been vetted. I think we're okay with, I'm okay with the numbers. The other programs as knowledge are not really that specific, just more of an attempt to things. And should have adequate dollars to make some of those things. So with the exception of whether that program contingency is a little too generous or not, I'm pretty comfortable with the program as presented.
Thanks, Tom.
This is Cheryl. I support Tom's statement and think that that's a very solid way for us to look at this proposal. I appreciate the incredible amount of work that Dan and Marina and your whole team has done to put into this, the thoughtfulness of your responses. It feels very solid to me, and I commend you for all of that. One quick sidebar comment would be that especially during these times, we're about to hit some very difficult economic times in the community. I'm wondering if providing some information on economic impact, particularly jobs created, the multiplier effects in the community, would be a good additional piece of information to frame the significant impact these projects that these dollars invested in the community would have.
Yes, this is Beth, and I agree with everybody, actually. I think the important thing for me is that whatever the decision is, it's clear in the bond document that the voters see that if there's contingency, say so. You know, what are the assumptions involved? And that if there's more community input for two of these projects, I think it would be wise to say so. That's a reason for, the construction schedule. But just to be clear with the voters is, to me, more important than the amount we try to assign to unknowns right now. Just to be open about it.
This is Norm. I agree with all three prior comments, and fantastic job, and lots of information brought to us, and pretty thorough vetting of nearly every topic. It seems like the one issue maybe there's a little disagreement on is the contingency, and I'm kind of with Cheryl, is more is better. And I think we're embarking on a 10-year roller coaster ride, and have some discretionary amount that ultimately, if it isn't fully spent, it would be spent on much needed work. And I'm kind of okay with Dan's description, where he itemizes kind of the discretionary and non-discretionary. And I personally accept that as a reasonable explanation, but I think it will be really critical how that language is. And as Kevin mentioned, it could come up as a topic of discussion with the media or whatnot. So I think it will be important to be very clear on that. Thank you.
Greg and Norm, I agree with you, and I wouldn't change anything that they have put forward. I agree with the contingency, the administration, and particularly when we look at the size of this measure and the size of what even the difference might be, even if we made one small change to it, particularly at this stage of where you are in the process. So I would vote for what we see from the staff. They did a great job.
Yeah, Kevin, I agree. First of all, Dan and Rita, you guys have done a fantastic job, and I'm comfortable with it where it is. I think, I mean, whoever thought we would be facing a pandemic in our lifetime? I mean, not in my lifetime anyway. And so, there's still a lot of unknowns, and until all of those unknowns can be designed into the schools and the Center for Black Excellence, I'm comfortable leaving the budget as it is.
This is Dick. I've got, and again, kudos, as everyone else has said, to the staff. You guys have put together a whole lot of work in a very short period of time. Couple of different points. Regarding the program contingency, I'm actually in the camp of less concerned about the amount of that because I think there are still some unknown risks that are potentially significant with the rehab of Benson and with the rehab portions of Jefferson High School. Whenever you get into really old buildings, my experience is you get lots of surprises. And so I think it's, for me, it comes down to being conservative, I think, as others have said, about the number, and I'm okay with the 10% as it was calculated. I am a little concerned, though, about the idea that it would be a resource for too early, maybe, for discretionary ads in scope. It seems to me, and I don't know if I'm getting out of the lane of the BAC's role, but it seems to me the first call for program contingency dollars should be to deliver the scope that was promised and to deal with, you know, if there's surprises in Benson and surprises in Jefferson and so forth, that it go to those requirements and that they be resolved before any discretionary allocation of program contingency was considered. Let me see, what else did I have? Oh, it feels to me like that we should comment about the $60 million for the Center for Black Student Excellence, and that we just don't have any basis for technically evaluating that number. Right. It is what it is, but you know, there's no technical information to base it on. What else? I guess also, and a couple of you have seen some comments from me on this before, and I don't know if this is outside the lane of the 2020 bond comments or not, but there is the state mandate to execute safety-related seismic improvements in schools by 2032. And this bond and others have moved the school district in that direction, but I'm not aware of a comprehensive plan to get there by 2032. And part of our charter, apart from specifically the 2020, the next bond review, is to provide advice on seismic improvements. And it seems like that's a point that we may want to take an opportunity to make with this recommendation, that this bond is moving toward that, but we don't see a comprehensive plan yet, unless there's one that I'm just not aware of. That's it for me.
I think it's important to note that the OSM team has been developing a long-term, planning session for this coming year. So certainly, Dick, I think you bring up a good point in the Seismic project could be looking at what needs to be in place over time. In looking at that 10-year plan, it would make sense to incorporate that in that work.
Okay, well, from listening to everyone, I think what is clear is that we're going to be able to validate staff's recommendations, maybe with a couple of comments, but no one's going to, I think, hold up a vote on the basis of those. So if it works for you all, I will draft up something, as I said, relatively brief. There's no benefit, I think, to reiterating 4.5 hours or 5 hours of discussion here. And I'll do my best to do that tomorrow, no later than tomorrow morning, and circulate it so we can get it to the board in advance of their board meeting on Tuesday. And I'd like to add everyone's comments about what Dan and Marina and the whole team has been doing, not just for today, although today's effort was pretty substantial with the very short notice. But the board has added, taken stuff away. They've changed the scope, and staff has had to react to all of that. And I think they've done an incredible job. The transparency, especially, has been very impressive. So, any other further comments, concerns? I don't see Dan even on my screen anymore. Did he leave? Once he got a vote, he left.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
If I hear anything good, though, I just start tuning it out.
Okay. Are we done?
I think that's all.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. We'll see you
I
soon.
second Carol's tweet.
Thank you all for your service.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.